Today I'm going to do something a little bit different, obviously by the title. I'm going to show you all the books that I've read this year so far. I didn't read as many books as I wanted to this year, but I still feel like I read a good amount. So yeah, let's just get into it. First, I want to go through all the books that I have skimmed this year. The first one being Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. This is a book about the history of debt collecting, the barter system, and credit. If you're into economics, this is a good book to read. It is very dry, so I did not read it front to back, but it is nice to skim through and is very interesting. I feel like there's not a lot of books that are about this subject. The next one is SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, and I do have that here. This is a good overview of ancient Rome. It's one of my favorites on the subject. Highly recommend this book. Do I throw it over here? Yes. The next book is On Grand Strategy. This is also not a book I would want to read front to back. It is also very dry. It's by John Lewis Gaddis. I believe he's a Yale professor. This is a book about the art of leadership through snippets of historical events. It is good for flipping through because it is divided into very short little sections that you don't really need to sit down and read the whole thing. Also very interesting if you're into history. How am I doing in my first video that isn't a tutorial? Okay, nope, wrong one. How to Read a Book, The Classical Guide to Intelligent Reading. This is another one I like to skim through. It has a lot of tags in it. This is a book that tells you exactly what it says on the cover. It tells you how to read books analytically. It also tells you how to read certain types of books. For instance, plays, poems, philosophy, science, social sciences, syntopical reading. It is very detailed and a very good overview of how to read a book, mostly a nonfiction book, in the most efficient way. I recommend this. The next one is The Precipice, which I do not have a copy of, would like a copy of. This is The Existential Risk and the Future of Humanity by Toby Ord. This is a popular book right now. It's basically a list of doomsday scenarios and different ways the earth will end. It is dark, but very interesting and very timely for right now. There is a section on pandemics, which I enjoy. He basically goes through how society can destroy itself, how humans can destroy themselves, but also how astronomically we could end. It is definitely pessimistic, but very interesting. The last one that I've been skimming this year and is being used as a tripod is The Soul of America by John Meacham, The Battle for Our Better Angels. This one is also pretty popular this year. Basically going through snippets of American history and how they have affected the soul or the core or the values of America. Highly recommend. All right, so now let's get to the books that I have read front to back. The first one is Identity, a novel by Milan Kundera. This is a short fiction about a love story between Chantal and Jean-Marc, the main characters, that grows into a commentary on identity and particular archetypes and how things aren't always what they seem, how people aren't always what they seem. And it has a very interesting and good ending. It's just a really good short book. The next one I read was Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger. It's exactly what the title says. This is a book about women and how they are received by society when they have negative feelings and emotions, and how their feelings are rejected when they are combative against sort of injustices, and how they always need to sort of keep their cool. I found that this book definitely added a lot to the conversation, but not enough for me to love it, but still a very good book. So now going into books that are in the 70% range. So these are just really good books that I don't really have too much of a gripe over. The first one is Becoming by Michelle Obama, an autobiography about the former First Lady, obviously. It took me a while to get around to reading this. It was actually not until she put out her Spotify podcast, which I very much enjoy, and I also very much enjoy this person, so of course I had to read this book. It goes through how someone started at humble beginnings to becoming the First Lady. And also, I really enjoyed the stories about her childhood. The next one is The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. First of all, I wanted to get a physical copy of this book because the cover is so nice. Also, the content of it is just really necessary. It goes over why we are convinced that minorities and African Americans suddenly have all these opportunities that they didn't have before, and that everything is great and fine when it's really not, that they do not have equal opportunity through very overt and obvious reasons like the legal system, zoning in residential areas, also obvious economic disparities. It's a bit dry, I will say, and straightforward, but is still very, very informative, and I recommend. The next one is 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus, a well-researched uncovering of Native life before Columbus. If you are unaware of this time period or Native Americans and how diverse and vast these cultures were, I recommend reading this. It is an easy enough read for someone that's getting started with American history and trying to just dive deeper into it. I would also recommend its companion, 1493, which is essentially the effects of post-Columbus and how it affected North America and the world. This is written by Charles C. Mann, and the way he presents history is very eye-opening, I think is the best way of putting it. And I highly recommend both of these books if you are getting started with American history. The next one is How to Be a Stoic. It's a lens through Epictetus and his teachings and how everything outside of oneself is out of your control and that you should have peace with that. Basically, the foundation of Stoicism being that you should just worry about yourself and not what other people think.
It's like, well, tomorrow I have a job interview. Did I do everything that is in my power up to this point to prepare for the interview? Yes. Am I focused at the beginning of the interview? Yes. Do I know what I'm talking about? Yes, that's it. Done. Then how the interview goes, it's not really up to you.
I would say that this doesn't go super in depth into the struggles or the sort of more challenging aspects of Stoicism or adopting Stoicism, but it is a good overview and a good place to start. The next one is The Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life. I wanted to read this because it was getting a lot of hype this year. It goes into like subconscious thought and why we may not be completely aware of the reasons we do the things we do or we think the way we think. Like the title suggests, it talks about the elephant in the room, that obvious thought pattern that we tend to use where we lie to ourselves in order to make something seem more palatable. This is not your typical self-help book, which is why I like it so much, and it definitely lives up to the hype. The next one is Denmark, Bessie's Garden, Slavery and Memory in the Cradle of the Confederacy. This speaks to a very specific parts of America, specifically like Charlottesville and other southern cities. It goes into the symbolism of the Confederacy and how we romanticize that time period in order to make it more palatable, and how that can be damaging to us as a country. The next one is Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. It's overall a telling of how Black girls are overlooked in the school system, how their traumas, maybe, that they're experiencing are overlooked and minimalized, how dress codes affect them negatively. It is really upsetting, and I recommend it to people who want to get into education, who are educators. The next one is Blood Dazzler by Patricia Smith. This is a collection of poems about Hurricane Katrina, but not really about Hurricane Katrina. It's about the people involved. It's about dealing with tragedy and sudden loss, and how certain people were affected more than others during tragedies like this in this country. Next is Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die by the Heath brothers, Dan Heath and Chip Heath. It goes into something called Velcro theory of memory, where you are relating information to other information that you already know, creating more and more connections so that your understanding of something is deeper and can be retained in your long-term memory. Very interesting read, highly recommend. It's a bit wordy, but the basic principles in here are worth the read. Now, getting into books that I thought were really great, this is the 80% range, 8 stars. The first one is Atomic Habits: An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones by James Clear. This one is popular right now. I recommend reading this if you're starting to set goals for the new year, or if you're trying to reimagine the way you approach goal setting and habits. It's basically about how behavior affects habit building, and if you're having trouble with consistency, if you're having trouble with goals kind of getting away from you very quickly, like me, read this one. I don't ordinarily write notes while I'm reading, but this book I did make a lot of highlights. So there's a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of good insights, and not a lot of filler in my opinion. It is very straight to the point. Getting into the last 4 books on my list. The first is In the Hurricane's Eye: The Genius of George Washington and the Victory at Yorktown. So it's on the relationship between Washington's army and the French Navy and the events and battles that led up to the Battle of Yorktown. If you are into American history and military history, this is a good one. It's an easy enough read. It's not horribly dry. The next one is Shoe Dog, a memoir by the creator of Nike. I don't know if I read this last year or this year. This year has just been so long. I don't know one year from the next at this point. But first of all, memoirs like this about people I don't really know, I usually don't read. Makes sense. I also don't really gravitate toward books about business. So on both ends, I didn't think this book would be for me. But because of all the positive reviews and all the people that recommended it to me, I thought I might as well read it. And I'm glad I did. So it follows the journey of Phil Knight and how he started Nike, all the hardships he's been through with this company. It's just a very good keep up and keep going type of story. The next one is The Summer of 1787, The Men Who Invented the Constitution. I feel like my relationship with this book and the rating I gave it, this 100%, is mostly due to the timing. It's also a very good book, but I read this during Trump's impeachment trial, so I was already in the mindset of really wanting to understand this time. In a nutshell, I feel like politicians tend to romanticize things that just simply are in the past. They tend to romanticize the founders. This makes the invention of the Constitution more real. This writer, David O. Stewart, really immerses you in that summer and how hot it was and how miserable everyone was in Philadelphia. So the number 1 book that I read this year that I thought was the most interesting is The Happiness Hypothesis: Finding Modern Truth in Ancient Wisdom by Jonathan Haidt. What the author does is take ancient wisdoms in each chapter and applies them to the modern world and the modern way of thinking. He goes into a lot about rationality and duality of life. Some of the chapters I have written down here include The Divided Self, Changing Your Mind, The Pursuit of Happiness, The Uses of Adversity, The Felicity of Virtue, and so on. It's a great lesson on positive psychology and has a really good reception from that community. It's easy enough to read. Yeah, that's about it. I will see you guys next week. Gonna have fun editing this. So much fun. I made a mess. Jesus Christ.